Welcome to Andy's Garage. I'm Andy Phillips. Today we're going to be replacing the valve stem seals on a Chevy Trailblazer. Now this is the 5.3 liter V8. So if you have any of the other vehicles that utilize this 5.3 liter V8 by GM, it would be the same process. Let's go ahead and get started. As we look underneath here, I've already removed the valve covers, but right now I'm going to show you just briefly what was needed to remove them. Now if you want to look more in depth, I do have a video where I showed how to replace the valve cover gaskets, where I show step by step how to remove everything, how to torque it when putting it back. If you want to see that, I'll have a link across the top, also down in the description. But for the sake of this video, I want to focus strictly on replacing the seals, so I didn't want to waste a lot of time with that. So let's take a look here how I got to where I am right now. First, we're going to start with removing this air intake duct and air cleaner. So we'll have to disconnect it from the throttle body, also the mass airflow sensor. And then now we can pull that out of the way, set that off here to the side. And now we have access to both sides here of the engine. So next thing we'll do is we will disconnect the ignition coil packs. Also start loosening up the ignition coil pack bracket that holds it on to the valve cover. So it's held on by multiple nuts going along here. So we'll take this ratchet, removing those, and then now we can slide that out. We'll pull that out here. And sometimes it's easier if you remove the alternator cable. I left it on just because I didn't feel like having to put it back on, but you can just slide it right here underneath that cable. And we'll pull that here, work that out. Pull the hoses out of the way, and there we go. It slides right out of there. And then now we have access to the valve cover. You do have the PCV valve on the driver's side that needs to be removed. So we'll pull that out and just slide that over here onto the side. And then now we can remove the 4 bolts that hold the valve cover on. We'll slide them off. And then same thing here like we did with the ignition coil pack bracket. We'll slide that through. And like I already said, if you want to remove the alternator cable, it makes it easier. Be careful also with the gaskets on the valve covers. You don't want them falling off as you're pulling it out. If so, you'll just have to put them back in place. But you want to be aware of that as you're pulling it out. So that's on the driver's side, bank 1. You can see here, there's our rocker arms and springs all shown right there for the valve stems. If we head over here onto the passenger side, which is our bank 2, we're going to start by disconnecting the throttle body harness. Also the mass airflow harness, we'll take that off. Pull all of these wires here. Just pull them out of the way. That way we have no obstructions to pull this valve cover off on this side. And we did on the other side, I didn't show it, but you also want to disconnect the ignition coil pack harness. And as we did on the other side, unbolt that, slide that out of place, and get that out of the way. And then now we'll remove those 4 bolts like we did on the bank 1, and we can slide that out. Same thing, be careful with the gaskets on it, but we'll slide that out. And just as we saw on the other side, there's our rocker arms, valve stem, springs. The seals are under that, and we have full access now to do what we need to do. So with the valve covers removed and the ignition coil brackets removed, now we have access to everything. So let's get the camera in here. I'm going to show you what we're looking at, and then I'm going to show you the tools needed to complete this, and then we'll get started. We are on the driver's side right here. So this is your cylinder 7, 5, 3, and 1 on this side. And what we have here on the top, that is your rocker arm. That needs to be removed using an 8mm socket to take that off. Then you have your valve spring, and your valve seal is below that spring, and then you have your valve stem coming through the middle. So once we remove this rocker arm, we'll be able to compress the spring to pull that out. Then you do have what's called the valve keeper. It's these 2 little clips that hold it in place. We'll look at those in a minute. But you need to remove those as well, and then the spring can come out, and then we can pull the old seal off, slide the new one in properly, and put everything back. This is on the passenger side, so you have your 8, 6, 4, and 2, your cylinders right there. Same process as we just looked at, the 8mm rocker arm, all that. Have a little bit of obstructions here with these lines in the way, but if we look this way, if you come in here, you can see there is enough room in there. We just need to be a little bit creative to work our way around that. So as you can see, once the valve covers are off, everything's pretty much on top. Now we are going to have to remove the spark plugs so we can put the valve holder line in there to keep the valves from dropping when we remove the springs. So you will have to do that. That's a little bit tricky. I'm not going to be going in depth with that as well. If you want to see a video I did on how to redo the spark plugs and spark plug cables on this vehicle, I'll have that link also across the top. Also to have it down in the description. That'll show you more easily how to access everything. It's a little bit tricky, especially on the passenger side on this vehicle. Just some poor engineering. It's very tight, but in that video I show how to get around all that. So let's take a look and see what's needed to complete this. These are the items that you'll need for this. First of all, you are going to need some kind of a magnet. I just have like a retractable one, but really any kind of strong magnet, so that way when you compress the spring, you can pick up the valve keepers. Because they're very small, you can easily lose them, as you'll see when we get started. So that's the first thing you need. Next, you are going to need a socket for the spark plugs. You will need an 8mm and 10mm sockets, and we'll use those to remove the valve covers and also the rocker arms and the brackets for the ignition coil packs. I have a small and a medium extension for the ratchet. You'll need both of those. I have some hose pliers for removing the spark plug cable boots, a ratchet. You will need the valve spring compressing tool right here. This is the particular tool that I'm going to be using. If you want to see more in depth on how to use it, I did a video showing how to use this particular tool. I'll have that link across the top, also down in the description for you. Obviously, you are going to need your replacement valve stem seals. You can pick these up anywhere online, automotive stores, things like that. They are not that expensive at all. And then you are going to need some valve stem seal pliers for removing the old ones and putting the new ones on. Last but not least, you are going to need this right here, which is called your valve holder. This is an air one, so it connects to a pneumatic compressor. You can pick these up fairly inexpensive, but if not, I did a video showing how to make one just using some common parts in your garage. You can check that out via the link above, also down in the description. But these are the items that you'll need right here to get started. So let's go ahead and get with it. Now it's important to know when you're looking at your cylinders, you have one cylinder here, one there, here, and then all the way back there. See if I can clear that up. That's the other one all the way there in the back. Now it's important to know which one is your intake and which is your exhaust. So as we're looking here, their intake valve is on the left and our exhaust is on the right. And it's important to know that because of this with the seals. With the particular set of seals that I purchased here, you have your different colors. For example, this one here, the brown one, that is for your exhaust valve stem seal. And your blue one is for the intake. They have a different size base. One is shallower than the other one. But when you pull the old ones off, you'll be able to compare them and see exactly what goes where. But it's important to make sure that you use the correct ones. We're going to start by taking the rocker arm off. This is an 8mm socket required for this, and I have a 6-inch extension on my ratchet. Okay, give it a good. There we go. It's moving. Remove that. Here's our valve spring, and tucked right around the stem is our valve keepers. So we're going to use that compressor tool to compress the spring down and then use the magnet to pull the keepers out, and then we can slide the spring off and then access the seal, swap it out, and then put it all back together. We're going to take our compressing tool and go ahead and open it all the way up. And then that'll slide over the spring here. This end will push down and it'll compress it this way, and then we can slide it off. We'll bring this in, and we're going to slide it like we showed. The longer side to go further down. And you want to make sure that you get a good grip on the spring. You don't want it just dangling on there. There we go. So now we'll start tightening it. You can see the keepers starting to come up a little bit. Let's continue to turn it. If I push down a little bit, you can see the keepers are coming up. To get our keeper out, we'll just take the magnet, put it right in there, give a little push. Here it is. The other one I already took out. That's the one that came out already. This is the one that we just removed. So those are what's known as the valve keepers. This magnet is perfect for that. You don't want to be losing those. If you do happen to lose them, you can get them $60 to $1 a pair. I mean, they're cheap. Let's pull the spring out. Next, we'll just pull the compressor back with the spring. There's our valve stem. That's our seal. Got that spark plug out, and you can see the fouling on it, which is a result from oil getting on them because of the failing seals on the valve stems. Here's a couple other spark plugs that came out of this same vehicle. You can see on this one here, it's like the one that we just saw that we pulled it off of cylinder 1 where it's fouled up. This one, you can even see the fresh oil still on it from it leaking onto the spark plug because of the seal being bad. But that's an easy indication if your seals are failing. Sometimes it can also be the piston rings, but in this case here, we know that it's the seals, but you can see how it's all fouled up. I have everything connected here to the valve holder now that we took the spark plug out. And if I show you here, that valve, you got to really push it down for it to drop. So let's get the pliers for the seal and pull that out. Coming in here, get a grip on this bad seal. Pull it out. You can see the valve stem is not dropping. If you didn't have the compressed air going through there, that thing could drop. You could have a real problem. Let's go ahead and get the new valve stem seal. We'll put it in place. We'll just bring it in, slide it right over, push it all the way down. You want to seat it all the way on. Let me get it. There we go. We'll bring the spring back. Want to make sure that the stem comes right through it. There we go. Line it up. There we are. Turn it this way so you can see it, but we're ready to put the keepers back in. And you want to be careful you don't lose these little guys. I just bring them in by hand. Let's see if I can show it on here. But you want to bring them in. Let's see if I can turn it where you can see it. But you'll notice as we move it, you have that space around the stem. So we'll just bring this in. You can see that. We just dropped that one in place. We'll bring the other one, put it on the other side, and then we can start releasing the spring and everything will lock back into place. I was able to rotate it. Now we'll bring the other one in. Same way, we'll just bring it in here. You can see it's in place. If we adjust the spring a little bit, push it down a little bit, want that to fall in place. The keepers have been dropped in place. As you can see, that's how it should look, nice and flush. They're locked in around that valve stem. So we're ready to remove the spring compressor, and then that will lock them in place. And just unscrew it. That's a close-up look. You can see the keepers are in place, spring is in place, valve stem is all locked in. Bring the rocker arm in. You want to make sure that you line that up with the bolt to it. We'll hand tighten it first. First one is done. I've hand tightened the rocker arm back on. We're going to go now and do the rest of this. I'm not going to show it because it's pretty much the exact same process. Now you do want to remember when you're done, hand tighten the rocker arm bolts. You do not want to tighten them yet. They will need to be torqued at 22 foot-pounds of torque, but they need to be torqued in a certain sequence, which we'll cover at the end. So I'm going to finish these here, and then we'll be back to start on the other side.
For doing these here closer to the firewall, you have this brake booster in the way with this vacuum line. I'm going to remove this vacuum hose. That'll give us a little more access here to get the spring compressor back in here, so keep that in mind as you're going in these tight spots. Doing this far valve stem seal all the way against the firewall. This is partially behind the brake booster. It's a little tricky. You got to kind of work it here. You'll get a little bit of clearance, but you got to really work it in there. It can be done, just got to have some patience. But as you can see here, we have it ready to remove the keepers already. But just wanted to show this, that you got to work it in here. Let's see if I can show it. There you go. It's got a little bit of clearance right there. Just remove the keepers and slide that out. Here's a good shot of cylinder 7 completed there, getting ready to put the rocker arm back on. But just wanted to show it. You can see the keepers are in place, everything is good. And that's it for this side. Here's a little shot right here. You can see the new seals lined up, the exhaust and the intake ones compared to the ones that came off this vehicle, and you can see how badly worn the ones on were. This side's a little bit tricky because you have the AC condenser lines running through here. I disconnected them, so that way this thing's a little more flexible. We were able to lift it and gave us, let's see if I can get in here, but gave us probably another 3 inches clearance, so that way we can get the spring compressing tool in there to get those out. And to remove those, you have 2 13mm nuts, one here and one going right into the condenser. You'll have just enough clearance right here by raising that up a little bit, so that way you can get this in here. And get a grip on it here, but you can turn it. It's a little bit tight, but we can turn it. This is the hardest one because then you get more space as it goes back this way.
Just finished removing the keepers out of this one here, the very last one, cylinder 8. You can see how tight this is. I actually had to disconnect this line here so I could move it a little bit because this thing is very tight back here. But now if we pull it, Should come up. There we go. So just be patient back there. That's the last one. And then we'll be back to torque everything. Hand tightening in. The last one here, this was a real pain in the neck to do because of its location and just tuck back in here. But we're just going to hand tighten this one, and then we're going to come back around, and I'm going to show you the torquing sequence for these, and then wrap up this video. As we get ready to torque everything down, I do have the rocker arms in place. They were just hand tightened. You don't want to be tightening them up at all at this point until you follow the sequence for the valves and cylinders that we're going to discuss to properly tighten and torque them in the correct order. But the first thing that you're going to do is we're going to have to rotate the crankshaft so we can move the pistons into certain orders that we're going to go over. So let's head underneath and I'll show you where you can connect to the crankshaft pulley so you can rotate it manually. Coming in from the front, we'll look right up there. There's our crankshaft pulley right there. And there is a bolt going right through the center of it that takes a 15th, 16th socket. As you can see, I have that attached, connected to a long ratchet that we can get from the top. Let's head up to the top and I'll show you where that is. So if we look down there, you can see our ratchet right here that's connected to the pulley that we saw underneath. We can turn this and you'll see it rotate. See that? We can move it by cranking it this way. So the next thing we're going to do, let's head back over here to the cylinders and I'll show you what we need to set up so we can get started. To start this process now of torquing down these rocker arms, we need to find the top dead center for this cylinder one. So as we manually turn the crankshaft, we want to make sure that we measure the top dead center accurately. For this one here, I'm just going to be using the pressure method. I'm just going to have my finger over the hole to feel when the pressure reaches the top dead center. And then once we hit that, then we can start the torquing sequence, and then we'll go from there. I have my air hose connected in through the spark plug port here for cylinder one. I'm going to start turning the crankshaft, and we're going to be keeping our finger over it here. We should start to feel pressure blowing against it. And then pretty much once that stops blowing, we should be pretty close to the top dead center. And then we'll put a metal rod in through there and kind of feel around and see where we're at that point. And once we have that confirmed, then we'll start our process. And I'm feeling the pressure coming up right now. All right, I think we're there. I'm going to take this out of the spark plug port and we're going to put just a thin screwdriver in there and feel around and then maneuver it and see if we're at that point. But I believe we're at the top dead center. Right here, I've inserted this long bendable line in there. I was going to do a screwdriver, but this particular vehicle, it's too tight to get one in there. So we've added that in. And I've adjusted it just a little bit. I turned the crankshaft a little bit and it's pinched in there. So this is all the way up here at the top. So we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and draw it back just a little bit so we can pull it out. And we are at the top dead center mark at this point. There's another shot. And you can also see, we get an angle right here of those two valves. You have on the left side is our intake valve. On the right is the exhaust valve. An easy way to tell is you line up the valve right there. You can see it has an exhaust port right here. Let's see if I can, right there in front of it here. You can see there's the exhaust manifold lined up there. Same with that one. So the left side is your intake, the right side is your exhaust. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that line out and then we'll start the torquing process. I backed the crankshaft up a little bit So we can pull this out. Now with the top dead center on cylinder 1 being set, we're going to start off by tightening the exhaust valve rocker arm bolts on cylinders 1, 2, 7, and 8 to 22 foot-pounds. Then we're going to come back and we're going to tighten the intake valve rocker arm bolts on cylinders 1, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm going to do that now, and then we'll be back to move on to the next part. Perfect, 22. Okay, first one is done. So I'm going to proceed now. I'm going to tighten the exhaust valve rocker arms on cylinder 2, 7, and 8 to 22 foot-pounds. Then we'll be back to hit the intake valve rocker arms. But I'm not going to show all of that. It's the same process. Just make sure that you do them in the order that I just said. So you're going to start with 1, and these are the exhaust valve rocker arms. You're starting with 1, and then you're doing 2, 7, and 8. And then we'll be back to do the intakes. Just finished doing 1, 2, and 7. 8 is on the passenger side against the firewall. That's your last cylinder because you have your bank 1 driver's side, bank 2 is passenger, so it's cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that was done. These were only the exhaust valves. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to now tighten the intake valves, starting with cylinder 1, and then we're going to do 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to start with cylinder 1. These are your intake valves, so they're on the left side. So once again, cylinders 1, 3, 4 is on the other side, and then 5. And then we'll be back. All right, so that now wraps up intake valve cylinder 5. So we did 1, 3 on this side, 4 on the other side, now 5, all to 22 foot-pounds of torque. So that wraps up this first phase. Just to recap, we did the exhaust valve rockers, cylinders 1, 2, 7, and 8. Then we came back and did the intake valve rockers at 1, 3, 4, and 5. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees, and then we're going to come back and tighten the next sequence of valve rocker arm bolts. Here underneath, I put a little bit of a tape marker on the crankshaft pulley, marking the downward position, so we can rotate this 360 degrees and make sure that it's right on point. Okay, it's almost there. And that's it, 360 degrees. Now that we've rotated the crankshaft 360 degrees, we're going to come back now and tighten the exhaust valve rocker arm bolts on cylinders 3, which is here, 4 on the other side, 5, and then 6 on the other side. And then we'll be back to do the intake valve rocker arms. Okay. Exhaust valve rocker arm on cylinder 6 has been done. Now the last part, we just finished doing the exhaust valve rocker arm bolts on 3 on this side, 4, 5, and 6. Now we're going to do the intake valve rocker arm bolts on 2, 6, 7, and 8. Once again, these are the intake valve rocker arm bolts, starting on cylinder 2, which is right here on the front, on the passenger side, then 6, which is second from the back, 7 on this side, which is at the very back, and then 8 on this side that's all the way in the back. So I'm going to do those and then we'll be back. Last one. And that's it. Cylinder 8, 22 foot-pounds of torque. Everything is done. Everything looks good. Everything's been torqued down properly. The next step that you would do now is you would replace the valve cover gaskets, put the spark plugs and spark plug cables back in place. Don't forget to put this air condenser, these lines, don't forget to connect those back on as well. I'm not going to show in this video because that's it for this video. If you want to see in detail as far as the valve covers, how to put them on, how to torque it properly, how to put the ignition coil pack bracket back on and connect all that, you can check it out via the video down in the description where I show how to replace the valve cover gaskets. That goes more in depth with that. But as far as this process here, replacing the valve stem seals on a Chevy Trailblazer with the 5.3 liter V8, as mentioned at the beginning, any of the other vehicles utilizing this GM 5.3 liter V8 would be the same thing. That wraps up this video then. Please send me any questions and comments. I would love to hear from you. As always, I appreciate all the support. Please like the video, subscribe to this channel. I'll see you next time.